If you want to learn how to take better indoor photos using the built-in flash on a camera like this one right here, which is the Nikon D3400, then stay tuned. This video is for you. I've received a lot of questions regarding how to take better photos using the built-in flash on a camera like this right here. Now again, this is the Nikon D3400, but I want you to understand it doesn't really matter if you're using the 3400 or the 33 or the 3500, or perhaps you are using a Canon like this one right here. This is the Canon T7i. This also has a built-in flash on it. Many entry-level and mid-level cameras have built-in flashes. I want you to understand that a lot of high-end cameras do not have the built-in flash, and many professional photographers do not feel there's a lot of benefit to it. Now, I guess I'm a little different in that way because I would rather have something than nothing if I'm caught in a situation where I do not have my speed light, like this one right here. This is my preferred speed light. This is the newer 750 Mark II. Now, I've done some videos on this in the past, and I'll post a link in the description below as to where you can find those videos and look more into this speed light if you want. But again, if I find myself without a speed light, then I would rather have something than nothing. So, with that said, many of you want to know, how do you take better indoor photos? Well, today I am down inside my basement and I've got some just basic lighting turned on. These are wall lights up here and behind me. In front of me I have some studio lights, but I have these just so that you can better see me in the video. Now, behind me, these are my subjects right here. It's nothing special, but this is a stuffed horse and a stuffed lion. I just have them sitting on the couch. That's what I'm going to use as we get into taking some photos, and that way you can see how the built-in flash impacts the subject in different ways. We're going to manipulate it and have some fun with it. Now, I want to go over just a couple of props here as we get underway, because I want you to understand that you can really enhance your photo using that built-in flash, just using some basic things that you may find just around the household. To begin with, this right here is just a piece of tissue paper that you would find in the bathroom. That's it. That's all this is. So we're going to make use of this right here on some of these photos. Another item that we're going to use will be this right here. This is just a little piece of tin foil. So if you have some foil around the house, this will come in beneficial. And another item we're going to test out will be this right here. Now, this is just a steel lid from a vegetable can. That's all this is. And last but not least, this is something that I like to carry around, and this right here is just a little mirror. That's all this is. You can see it's about the size of a business card. So this mirror is something we're going to use as well, and you're going to find this to be really beneficial, I think. So with all that said, I want to just jump right in, and I want to talk about some of the basic settings on the camera, what they mean, some of the stuff you can do with them, and then we're going to jump right into the demos, and I'm going to show you the settings, and we're going to take a look at the results, and then I'll finish up with a few final thoughts. So with all that said, let's jump right in, have some fun. If I'm at a family event, and again, I'm without a speed light or triggers, but I do have a camera with a built-in flash in it, I'm going to make use of one of three modes on my dial. Now, I'm either going to use the shutter priority mode if I am trying to get candid shots and people are moving around and I want to try to freeze that motion. Now, when I do this, I know that minimum is 1/60th of a second, and that 1/60th is not really good if people are moving, so I want to try to increase that, and I might use 1/100th of a second or 1/125th of a second. Now, if I feel like people are going to be posing for shots, because that happens a lot, you know, it might be your, I don't know, your Aunt Martha or whoever, turning around, looking at the camera for a picture, or maybe you got those group photos, that's when I'll move into Aperture Priority. Now, more often than not, I'm going to open that aperture as wide as I can. But if I have people standing behind people, or 2 or 3 rows of people, Then I'm going to increase my aperture, and I know that the ISO is going to raise up, and I'm okay with that, but it's going to allow me to control that depth of field so I have a greater shot at getting more of the people in focus, and that's really what the aperture priority is all about. Now, the third mode that I might leverage here is manual. Now, when we do the demo back here in just a minute, I'm going to show you exactly how I put the settings into the manual mode to really try to get the most out of this camera. Now, I think the resulting images, along with using some of these props, will yield some really nice results. Now, it's just my opinion on it. It'll be up for you to kind of play around with your own camera and your own settings to see what kind of fun and cool results you can get from that. So, something I want to chat about right now, though, is ISO. Many of you will ask, hey, do I manually control the ISO or do I use auto ISO? What's my take on auto ISO? Well, ISO is something that I typically like to control, and on this D3400 right here, there's a function button on the side, and so I can just push that function button. It's assigned to control my ISO. I can quickly adjust it. Now, the D3500 doesn't have that, so you have to go into the manual, you have to go into the menu system to make those adjustments, and it's not a big deal. But when I'm indoors, there is something that I've discovered about the Nikon camera right here, and I know this is on the 3300 and the 34 and the 3500, and I believe it's on the 5000 series as well. But what I've noticed is that when you are using auto ISO, the camera has the ability to select an ISO that's between stops. What do I mean by that? Well, keep in mind, if you're relatively new to photography, ISO is your camera's sensor's sensitivity to light. Now, this means that if you're in a relatively dark situation, you can increase the ISO, which will increase the light that's hitting your subject and the background and everything else. And you might think that's a good thing, and it is for the most part. But if it goes too high, then you get artifacts, or what's called noise, in the image, and that can make it a little unpleasant unless you're post-processing, and you can try to remove some of that noise. And I've got a video on how to use Lightroom to make that happen. I may post a link in the description below if you're interested. But ISO for me, when I'm indoors, sometimes I will use auto ISO. Now, again, I do that because this Nikon right here can select an ISO that's between those stops, and a stop is multiplied by 2, so ISO starts off at 100 and then it goes to 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 64, 12.8, and 25,600. The benefit again to Nikon is that if I am forced to select between 3200 and 6400 to get a properly exposed image, if I do it manual, I have to make that jump. If I let the camera control that, it can select 4000, for example, and fall somewhere between those two ranges. Now, that's to my benefit if I let the camera control that. So typically, I will go with the auto ISO, except when we get into manual mode, and again, I'll demo that in just a minute. Now, something I've noticed about the Canon camera right here, again, this is the T7i, is that I've noticed that when I did a review on this camera, it did not seem to have the ability to select a ISO falling between the stops. Now, that might just be the difference between these two manufacturers here. It's just something that I happen to notice. Now, the last thing I want to talk about from a setting perspective is TTL. Now, what is TTL? Well, TTL is through the lens. That's basically your camera's fully auto function control over the built-in flash. Now, that means that your camera will control the power that your flash will use to properly expose an image. By default, this is turned on. Now, I noticed with the Nikon right here, it has manual control. Now, I really like that, and we're going to make good use of that here in a minute. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, doesn't the camera use a full flash when it's needed all the time? No, no, not much. And I'm going to demo that out here in just a minute, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. In our demo, I'm going to actually, I'll take a shot with TTL on, and then we're going to manually adjust the flash to 100% or full power, and then we'll take another shot with the same settings, and you'll see just how overexposed it really is. it gives you a little taste of what the full power capability is of the built-in flash. Now I noticed with the Canon camera right here, again this is the T7i, this does not seem to have manual control over the flash, but it does have flash exposure compensation, which is kind of nice. I mean, basically it's using TTL, so you can tell the camera, hey, expose up or down depending on what you want. So you can strengthen that flash or lessen it if you choose. So with all of that said, what I want to do right now is let's go ahead and jump into the demo and let's see what we can do to take a lot of kind of neat shots and how we can enhance them a bit with the props. We're going to start our demo by using the shutter priority mode. Now I went ahead and moved the dial on the top side of the camera here to the letter S, and that indicates shutter priority. You'll also see it's noted on the back of the LCD here. Now it's a little dark down here, it might be kind of tough to see my fingers, but I'll do my best to call out what I'm doing. Keeping in mind that this camera is now mounted to a tripod and I have locked focus on the subject in front of me, and I'm just about 5 or 6 feet away from those stuffed animals. Now, what I'm going to start off doing is hitting the menu button, which is here on the left-hand side. My thumb's tapping on it right here. And what we want to do is we want to go into the shooting menu. Now inside the shooting menu, we want to take a look at the ISO sensitivity settings. You can see it's currently highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and use the pad on the right side of this camera on the back and just hit the OK button. That's going to take me into this right here. And I want to ensure that my auto ISO sensitivity control is set to on. Something else to note is the maximum sensitivity setting. You can see that this is set for 12,800. Now again, if you do not think you will post-process these images and you want to keep your noise relatively low, you might consider selecting 6,400. In this case, I am going to be shooting in RAW and I will do some post-processing in Lightroom. Now, my post-processing is going to be very minimal. I'm just going to use it to export the JPEG and make very slight enhancements to the image. But we want to ensure that our auto ISO is set to on. We want to go back to the shooting menu and then arrow down and keep going until you get down to flash control for built-in flash. Now again, on this particular camera, you can see it is set to use TTL, which is perfectly fine. In a little bit, we will come down and we'll select manual and have some fun with that. But for now, we just want to ensure that those two settings are selected and we are good to go to move forward with our demo. So let's go back to our main display and take a look at what's going on here. To begin with, my shutter speed is set to 1/100th of a second, and I can go ahead and adjust that by moving the dial on the back side of this camera to the left. And there's 1/80th, go again, 1/60th. I'm going to go ahead and move this back up a bit. Now one step up from the 1/100th is 1/125th of a second. I'm going to go ahead and move this back to 1/100th of a second, keeping in mind that you're going to want to evaluate your own scene and if people are moving around. Now I typically think if they're moving slow and there's just slight movement here and there, 1/100th might be good enough to kind of stop that motion. If it's not, go ahead and bump it up a little bit. But we want to try to use the minimum amount that we need to in order to freeze motion. So what's going on here? Well, right here in the middle, this is flashing, the f4.2. Now that's our aperture. And because we're in shutter priority, the camera is automatically controlling the aperture, so we really don't need to be too concerned about that. But it's flashing for a reason. I'm going to tell that to you in just a second, but I want you to note right next to this, this is our auto ISO. Now that's flashing because it's telling us that the auto ISO is activated. So without the auto ISO, we had it set to 100 manually, and that's definitely not going to fly here. So the camera's saying auto ISO is activated, and by the way, I have your aperture open as wide as it will go, and it feels that the scene is still going to be too dark. Now let's go ahead and just take a shot, see what it looks like. So as you can see by looking at this image, the background is relatively lit up here, the foreground not so much, and you can see it used an ISO of 12,800. Now that 12,800 is kind of high in this instance, but that's okay. We expected that, that's what we saw. So with that said here, what do we want to do next? Well, what I'm going to do is go ahead and pop the flash. Now I'm going to pop the flash here on the left side of this camera. Just in front of the main body, there's a button for the flash. I'm going to go ahead and push it. Now you can't quite see it in the video here, but there it is. I just went ahead and activated it. Now our flash is up. Now I want you to notice what happened. The aperture right here stopped flashing, but our auto ISO continues to flash. Now, keeping in mind that we're using TTL, so the camera now knows that we have the flash popped up, and the camera's going to go ahead and control the power to the flash, and it knows it's going to still need the ISO, the auto ISO activated. Now it's showing 12,800. This is a little misleading. It will not actually use 12,800. Now if you were to point this camera at a light source, this value right here in the 12,800, it will fluctuate. So it may fluctuate up and down a little bit, but again, it's going to max out at 12,800. Right now the camera thinks it needs it, but when this flash fires, it won't actually use it. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and take another shot. Here we go. Now, as you can see in this shot right here, the foreground, or the subject, is much more illuminated than the previous image, and the background is still lit up. Now, take a note of the ISO. The ISO is 2,500. Now, that is much, much less than what it was noting at 12,800, and it's much better than what it was before. So, that's just something to note as you get into leveraging shutter priority. Now that particular image isn't bad, but you can tell you're using the flash and it's just straightforward. There's nothing special about it. It's sort of that plain image. What I want to do right now is let's go ahead and move into aperture priority. So I'm just moving the dial on the top side here to the letter A, and it's noted here on the back side of the camera as well. So we are now in aperture priority. Now I want you to notice something else. The shutter speed, which the camera now controls, is set to 1/60th of a second. And you might be asking the question, well, why 1/60th? Where did that come from? Well, this is coming from our setting in the auto ISO setting. Let's go back and take a quick look at that. I'm just going to hit menu here, and we're going to go back to our auto ISO, which I'm just scrolling up here to our ISO sensitivity settings. And you'll see right down here 1/60th of a second. Now if I move this over and say we move this up to 1/125th of a second, I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to go back to our screen, and you'll see now it's defaulting to 1/125th of a second. Now again, when I'm in aperture priority, my expectation is that people are posing for shots. So I don't necessarily think I need 1/125th of a second. 1/60th of a second should work just fine, providing that they're posing and they're not moving around. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to 1/60th of a second. We're going to go back to our screen, and now we're set to go. I want you to also notice here that the auto ISO continues to flash, and that's perfectly fine. The camera once again thinks it's going to need 12,800. That's our max, and it won't need that. Let's go ahead and take a shot, see what it looks like. Now, as you can see in this shot, you'll notice that the ISO being used was 2,800. And if you look at the image itself, it does look very similar to the previous image, perhaps, except the background might be a little more illuminated, and the subject is still illuminated almost in the same fashion. So there's not a whole lot of change going on here. It's just kind of a basic shot as you might expect. What I want to do right now is talk for just a minute about manual controls and what we're going to do here. Now I want you to understand that when we took that previous shot in aperture priority, we had that ISO in the 2000 range, and you can look at our settings, which are still in the back of the camera. We shot at 1/60th of a second. We were using an aperture of 4.5. What I'm going to do is move into manual mode. And again, what I'm going to do is control our shutter speed. And I'm going to try to get it the same settings that we had before, 1/60th of a second. Our aperture right here is set to 4.5. It looks like we can go down to 4.2. So we're going to go ahead and take that. Actually, let's go ahead and move that back up to 4.5 to match what we were before. And our auto ISO is flashing right here. Now, what I want to do is go ahead and take another shot. And you're going to see that this shot looks just identical to the previous one we just took, and it should. The only difference here is that we are in manual mode, and you can see that the auto ISO is still using 2,800. The only difference here is that we are in manual mode. Now, what I'm going to do is take the flash off of TTL, and we're going to move it into a manual flash posture, and we're going to go full power and see what happens. So I'm going to use the menu button here off to the left hand side. I'm going to come down to our flash control. We're going to go into manual. We're going to use full power. So I've got that selected. We're going to go back to our screen here, and I want you to note what happened here with our auto ISO. When we jumped off TTL, the camera defaulted back to an ISO of 100. Now I'm going to go ahead and move this up, because if we want to replicate something similar to what we had before, we need to be up in the 2000 range. Now unfortunately, when I do manual ISO, I'm forced to select one of the stops. So either I go 1600 or 3200. Let's go down to 1600. So we're not even in the 2000 range right now, but you can see all the settings are identical to what they were before, with the exception of ISO, which is actually less. Now, we're running with a manual control on the flash, and again, it's set to full power. Let's take the shot and see what it looks like. Now you can see this shot is extremely overexposed, and our ISO is lower than what it was before. Now the purpose behind this particular demo is to let you know just how powerful the flash can be. So when we're leveraging TTL, which is the camera's fully auto control of the flash, you can see that it's really just using a fraction of the power that it's capable of. So with all that said, what I want to do right now is jump into using some of the props and seeing what we can get from that. And we're going to do all of this in manual mode. I went ahead and turned on the studio light so you could see me, because I want to show you exactly how I'm going to use these props against the flash before we step into this demo. It's important that you understand kind of what I'm doing, and that way you can see the results, and it'll give you some ideas, I think. Now what I think I'm going to do here is start off with the tissue paper. And with this tissue paper, it's not too often that I use something like this without folding it over. Now what I mean by that is you can take this and just fold it once, and now you have two layers of it. And what I do is just put it right between my first two fingers and pull it right against the flash, just like this. And that helps again to diffuse the light against the subject. Now we use our steel can lid. This is similar, but what you want to pay attention to is when this flash comes out, you want to be sure you cover the flash up. And you can see that I'm not angled too far down like this, because if I'm angled like this right here, the flash is going to spill out onto the subject, and I'm not all the way back at myself. I am just up enough to where the flash is covered, and the light might actually go behind me just a little bit, but it will definitely hit the ceiling. Now that's reflecting the light from the top. If I want to reflect it from the wall to the side, I'm just going to angle it, something like that right here. And this will allow the light to go to the side and behind me a bit. So it works just as well. And the same thing will apply to our tin foil. Now again, I've got this just flattened piece of tin foil, nothing special here. Now what's kind of nice about the tin foil is that it's much more pliable, so I can bend it and shape it, and it allows me to reflect up. I can reflect to the side. I can kind of make a combination if I want to sort of bend it in odd ways and just get more reflection out of that. Now, when it comes to the mirror is obviously just flat and straight, but it is the most reflective surface that we have. And again, if I just lay this up just like this right here, the light will spill off behind us and on top. And then if I want to angle it to the side, I do so just like that. As I go to demo the tissue paper, I'm going to go ahead and move back into Aperture Priority, as noted by the A in the upper left-hand corner here. I'm going to also go back into our menu mode, and I want to select our TTL for our flash down here in the bottom. So I'm just going to come in here, come up and select TTL, and let's go back to our screen, and you can see that we are set and ready to go. Now, for comparison purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just take a baseline shot without the tissue paper, and let's see what it looks like. Now, as you can see, I think that shot is really not too bad. And again, we're at an ISO of 2800. So that actually looks pretty good. What I'm going to do right now, though, is just use the tissue paper, put it in front of the flash, and I'm going to pull it tight against it, and we're going to go ahead and take another shot and see what that looks like. Now, as you can see, that shot is just a little bit softer, and what I want you to notice is the background. So you see how the background kind of comes to life here. Also notice that our ISO is now 5600. So as we increase the ISO, the background will also come to life, but keeping in mind it also introduces a little more noise to the image. Now I kind of like that second image there as opposed to the first, but that's just a personal preference. I think it helps to even out the overall lighting of the image itself. The next thing we want to do here is go ahead and move in to a reflection with our steel can lid. And to make this happen, I'm going to go back into manual mode, and you can see it's noted here in the upper left hand corner. We're going to go back into the menu system because we want to take off TTL, and we want to use full power of our flash. So I have full power selected, and let's go back to our screen, and let's just take a look at our settings here. So our settings in manual mode are 1/60th of a second, and we're using aperture of 4.5. I'm going to go ahead and just open that up. I think, give me just a second. There we go. So we can go all the way down to 4.2. It's not a huge difference from 4.5, but it does open it as wide as it will go with the lens that we have. Now my ISO is set to 1600 at this point, and again, I can control this and bring it up or down. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 1600. Now I want you to know as well, keeping in mind that if you have subjects moving around, you can go ahead and take your shutter speed and increase this to 1/100th of a second or whatever you feel might be appropriate. Keeping in mind that we are using full power on this flash, it's going to give us a lot of light. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this steel can lid, and we're going to first reflect off the ceiling, and let's go ahead and take a look at this particular shot and see what it looks like. And there you go. Now I really like that shot right there, and you can see that we're still at an ISO of 1600, but I like the way this looks. It's as if light is coming down from the ceiling, and I think it gives a nice interesting look to the subject here. What I want to do next is go ahead and reflect off the wall to my right, and let's see how this looks. So again, I'm going to hold that steel lid up just as I mentioned before, and let's take a shot. Now as you can see, it looks like the light is coming from the right side of the image, and this is another good look in my opinion. I still really like that. And something I want you to keep in mind is that if you do want to increase the ambient light in the background, you can raise the ISO one more stop if you want. But I find that 1600 is actually looking pretty nice right here, and I kind of like that. Next up is going to be our tin foil. So I'm going to go ahead and put the tin foil. Just as I mentioned before, we're going to reflect it off the ceiling, and let's see what this does for us. And again, you can see how this really looks like the light is coming down from the top. I really like the look and feel of this right here. And keeping in mind that we're still at 1600 ISO. Now this is a little bit brighter when we compare it to the steel can lid. But that's to be expected because foil is just a little more reflective. Now again, I'm going to do the same thing as I did before and reflect this off the wall to our right. Here we go. Let's take a look. And you get a very similar look here where the light is coming from the right-hand side. Now again, I feel that this offers a little more light to the overall scene, and most likely that's just because it's foil and it's more reflective. But I like the look and feel of this image. Next up is going to be the mirror. So with the mirror, we should get the most available light this flash is able to put out. Here we go. We're going to reflect off the ceiling, and let's see what it looks like. Yeah, you can see this right here. There's actually a lot of light coming down from the top at this point. And with this, we might be able to take our flash power and back it off from full power to half power if we want to lessen the light just a little bit. But you can see the power of that flash. What we're going to do now is, again, reflect off the right side of the wall. And here we go. Let's take a look. Similar to the other two, objects that we used, we're getting a lot of light from the right-hand side, and I do feel that this is even more light than the previous two, and that should be the case because it is a mirror, and a mirror is meant to reflect more. Something I'd like to do real quick is let's go ahead and back that off. Let's back the power of our flash off. Instead of going full, let's go ahead and knock it down to half power, and let's select that. We're going to go back to our scene right here, and I'm going to use the mirror again, and we're going to come down from the ceiling. Let's see what that looks like. Here we go. It's kind of an interesting look here. You can kind of see it's obviously not as much light as before, but it's a nice look overall. So I kind of like these props right here. I think they did pretty well. After looking back at some of those images, I'm really surprised and pleasantly impressed by how some of these props can really enhance an image using the built-in flash on these cameras. Now, as I mentioned before, many professional photographers and camera manufacturers don't give a lot of credit to the built-in flash. But I think with just a few basic props, you can do a lot with this flash. Now, you may not always run around with a little piece of tinfoil, but if you just grab some, fold it up, stick it in your camera bag, you'll always have it with you. And if you're lucky enough to have a camera with a built-in flash, just know that you can do a lot with it. Look around when you're inside a building, look at the ceilings and the walls and see what you might be able to bounce that flash off of. Now, I went ahead and used that tissue to help diffuse that light on a straight-on flash, but many photographers, myself included, I'm not a big fan of that flash hitting someone straight in front of them, so whenever I can reflect it, I will. But if I do not have the option to reflect it, then I will go ahead and use that tissue to try and diffuse it. Keeping in mind, if you walk into a building and you look up and you see an extremely high vaulted ceiling, then look to the side walls. See if you can get your subject to stand kind of close to that so you can bounce off it. Just get creative with it, have some fun with it. That's what it's all about. Keeping in mind there's no one right way, but I want you to understand that the built-in flash on these cameras in this day and age, they're relatively powerful and they do have a purpose. You just need to know how to use it in different ways to get the results that you want. So I hope this video has helped you out, and if it has, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. It's called Real World. More often than not, I post videos about photography and technology, but you never know. So until the next video, take care of yourself and be safe.